Hey everybody, I'm Logan Albright with Free the People, and this is my friend and colleague Mike Feuz. Say hello, Mike.
How's it going, everybody?
We're trying out a new format here. We're doing a podcast called Last Call, where we wrap up the week's news and talk about what's going on in the world from a libertarian perspective. We're going to try to do it every week, and we hope you'll join us.
I'm excited to be a part of this with you, Logan.
Well, why don't you tell people who you are?
So I'm Mike. I've Feuz. I've been hanging around, I guess, the Free the People crowd for a while. Done a few events with you and Matt in the past. Kind of come to that casual Christmas party, but just this past year, Matt and Terry both invited me to kind of start getting more involved from an official level. Came on as a research associate, been working under you. It's been a lot of fun so far, so kind of cool that we have another project to do together.
Yeah, we've been friends for a while. You were the spearhead of the Liberty Pub events, which we've been continuing online during coronavirus, and so it's good to have you on board.
Yeah, I'm excited, especially this is something cool Matt and Terry are letting us to run with and kind of own ourselves. So
yeah. So I'm Logan Albright. For those who don't know, I'm the head writer at Free the People, and I also run sound and a couple other things. And we just wanted to talk about, let's start with the news of the week. Kamala Harris has been asked to be the VP candidate for the Democratic Party. I think we all have opinions on Kamala. The internet is kind of going crazy on her. What's your take on Kamala Harris?
When the Democrats were having their very crowded primary field, I told several people the two people I disliked or feared the most was Kamala and Elizabeth Warren. I thought they were both the most micromanager, top-down central planner personas on the stage.
Yeah, before we talk too much about Kamala, I think I need a drink.
Oh,
this
good.
is Last Call. It's a drinking show.
Maybe every time you say Kamala, you should have to drink.
I think we'd get blotto by the end if we did that. Can I hook you up here?
Thank you, sir. And what are we drinking today?
This is a bottle of single malt Irish whiskey that I have called Napogue Castle.
Did you buy this just on a whim, or have you had it before?
You know, I was getting into Irish whiskey because I was in Ireland last year, and I just saw this on the shelf, and I thought it looked good, and it was a price I could afford, and I thought I'd pick it up, and I like it. It's good. It's kind of like a halfway between Irish and Scotch flavor because of the single malt character, which most Irish whiskey is not. So I'm
Is that more of a woody taste, or what's
more of a peaty, a little bit almost?
Oh, that's good.
But yes, I agree with you. Kamala Harris was my last of the pack pick in the Democratic primary. I think her record is extremely troubling. Her rhetoric is extremely troubling. For those who don't know, Kamala Harris was a attorney general in California. She was a district attorney in San Francisco. She was a senator, and her record is just full of really harsh, tough on crime, drug war type prosecution stuff, which I think is super tone deaf in this day and age when everybody's talking about police reform. People are saying defund the police. People are worried about police brutality and police overreach. People are worried about justice reform. And to nominate someone whose career involves harsher penalties for nonviolent drug users. She's on record basically arguing that nonviolent drug users should stay in prison for cheap labor purposes. And she's done increased civil asset forfeiture. She's done all kinds of horrible things for the justice system and the drug war. To have her be there in this era of police reform just seems incredibly tone deaf to me.
Yeah, I think I was kind of shocked, but not shocked they picked her. Mostly because, one, she seemed like the most logical choice, or at least is what they were running out, and seemed to her name always seemed to be mentioned in the top. But when I looked at her record and what is on the forefront of the public's mind today with the Black Lives Matters movement, criminal justice reform, all of that, she seems like the most illogical choice. So I didn't want to believe it until it was officially announced.
Yeah, I want to get into that because we could sit here and talk about how terrible her record is all day, but I'm kind of interested in why did they make this pick? I'm confused about it myself. I don't think it makes a lot of sense given the politics of the day. And what do you think? Why do you think that the Democratic Party would pick Kamala over all the other qualified candidates for vice president?
And mine is, Bernie seemed like the most logical person to nominate because he had the most grassroots base following him. No one is like a Biden adherent or follower in any, but he's someone that's easy to control. And I think she's willing to kind of fit in that mold and let whatever the powers to be, whatever you think those are, if it's just the party infrastructure, kind of control her. She's willing to exchange that, in my mind, I think, just like Biden is, for that seat of power. And probably Obviously, I can't imagine many people think Biden, if he wins, is around for 2 terms, let alone maybe a full term. Not to ill wish him, but it's very likely she's president if Biden wins the election.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because she got like less than 1% in the primary.
Yeah.
And if she ends up being president, she'll be someone that less than 1% of people voted for. It's very strange, and it seems very undemocratic for the Democratic Party, which is fairly ironic.
It almost, and she's not, her state isn't like an in-play state either. There's no strategy like, oh, we need to win California. Like the Democrats have California.
No, well, clearly there was a racial and gender component to the nomination. Biden said early he wanted to get a woman of color for his VP, so that narrowed the field a little bit. But surely there's a lot more qualified or less crazy people he could get. I hear people calling her a moderate. I don't think she's really a moderate. She has pushed some pretty progressive policies in her day, but the tough on crime stuff she did is really upsetting to me. And there's another thing in her history that I wanted to mention, where she wanted to prosecute parents for not sending their kids to school for truancy. So she was going to jail parents for truancy of their kids. And there's one case where she went after a woman whose kid was missed 20 days of school because she was sick with leukemia or something like that. Like, it's legitimate sick days, not just missing school for fun of it. And she went after the mother and tried to jail her for that. I think that's just reprehensible. I mean, as you know, I am a huge opponent of mandatory schooling laws anyway. And so to actually punish parents for truancy seems ridiculous to me.
I know this kind of, if anyone has actually read your book, which I have, that's, I think, section number 1 is education, where you go over through the history, and you're certainly not a friend of any kind of compulsory schooling. And I kind of tend to agree with you. Your book was pretty convincing, but I actually didn't know that about Kamala, that she went after parents.
Yeah, it's troubling to me. I'm worried about what she would do as vice president or potentially president in terms of education freedom if she has that attitude towards it.
It kind of fits with her central planner. I have a plan for everything in society, though, kind of mantra I think she espouses, and just her, I don't know, how she comes across to me.
Yeah. I was watching the Tim Pool podcast, and he has a theory, which I don't really buy, but it's interesting to talk about, that the Democrats know they're going to lose in November, and so they're putting up people that don't really have a political future. They don't want to waste somebody who has a good political future ahead of them in a sinking ship administration, and so they're putting up Kamala because they're like, well, we don't have any use for her in the future, so let's just get her out of the way now, and we can put better people up in the future. I don't think that that's true, but that's Tim Pool's theory, which I thought was interesting.
I don't subscribe to that. Certainly, I get maybe Joe Biden certainly looks like the Bob Dole of the Democrat Party. I think he certainly has a chance.
Yeah, he definitely has a chance. I am terrible at predicting election results, but I feel like it's pretty even at this point. Yeah. So I don't really know who's going to win.
Yeah, after 2016, I won't make a guess.
No, it's folly to try to predict things like that. It never works out.
I'll just pretend I made that guess after the election. Like, I knew this was coming.
Well, yeah, you can do that now. People are saying, I didn't say that, even though it's on video.
Yeah.
And people just believe them. So you can just disavow a previous statement or pretend you said something you never said. It's easy enough to get away with.
Yeah, I'm going to be non-committal to the very end and then just pick after the fact that that's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, but I tend to agree with you. I think it's a party loyalist thing, rewarding people who it's their turn. They paid their dues. They're not too scary. They're not too far left. They feel like they can control them. Someone like that would be, Kamala.
I don't know if she's paid her dues yet, maybe in the California, but yeah, she certainly could be the easy sacrificial lamb. They checked their boxes. We nominated the woman. We got the person of color. To make up for that old white guy we put at the top of the ticket that is also terrible on crime and criminal justice reform and harsh penalties. He was during the Clinton administration, and prior to that, he's authoring.
Yeah, maybe it's just that they're natural complements as people because they both have the same record on criminal justice. Biden sponsored all of these crazy criminal justice bills, crime bills back in the 90s under Clinton and in the 80s and even a few in the 70s, which basically ramped up the drug war, introduced mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, ramped up civil asset forfeiture, basically created the militarization of police. Everything bad that progressives don't like about the police force, Joe Biden basically created. And so I guess she's a natural complement to him in that regard.
They fit like a hand in a glove. I'll be curious if the Republican Party is smart enough to actually roll out their criminal justice reform bill, which I'm now blanking on the name of it. The First
Step Act.
First Step Act.
Yeah.
If they actually put that at the forefront, I don't know if they're smart enough. It's also would be an opportunity if the Libertarian Party wants to actually, step in and start speaking in areas that both major parties want to avoid, it seems like.
Yeah, it's a sad thing about politics. We had Rand Paul on Kibbe on Liberty a couple weeks ago, and I guess last week, and he was talking about the reason nothing is getting done on criminal justice reform is that nobody wants to play that card before the election. Everyone wants to run on that issue. So the Democrats won't solve anything right now because they want to say, oh, if you vote the Republicans in, they won't solve it, but if you vote us in, we'll solve it. And the Republicans have the same strategy. You know, they don't want to fix anything because they can run on it then if it's not fixed. They can say they're going to fix it in November.
It's kind of like the Elizabeth Warren statement during the primary. I have a plan to solve veteran suicide, and it's for such a critical issue. If you really have a plan that could solve that, why are you holding it?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Same kind of play there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's enough about Kamala for now. There's plenty to criticize her, and we'll do some more on that later. But I wanted to talk about, we were in Texas last week to interview Dr. Ron Paul. And this was a big dream for me because I'd never met him. I've always admired him. And we got to talk to him. I think he's about to turn 85 years old. And so he's in great shape. He's in great physical shape. He's in great mental shape. We went down to his little recording studio in Lake Jackson, Texas, and we got to talk to him, and that was a lot of fun. So I'm excited for people to see that episode when it comes out. And I wanted to kind of ask you about, so many people were turned on to libertarian ideas by Ron Paul's 2008 presidential run. I wanted to ask you about your kind of history with Ron Paul. Were you a Ron Paul kid? Did you come to him early? Did you come to him late? What's your feelings about him?
I came to Ron Paul late, if you consider the 2012 election late. I remember in 2008 was the first time I started listening to him, and I definitely had some close friends that were the early Ron Paul adherents that were sending me a lot of videos. I remember for maybe a month or so, I was just diving into listening, open to the argument, especially stuff on his, blowback theory with our foreign policy and internationalism. But then wasn't really ready to leave the neocon camp yet at that stage of my life. I was a sophomore in college, I think. And then come around 2012 when Romney's running, and it's like, is this the same old, same old? It's kind of when I really kind of came into the Ron Paul camp and really started following him. So I guess I was a late adopter.
It's funny how similar our backstory is on that, because I was the same way. I was living in New York in 2008 when he was running, and I was sort of a libertarian at the time, but I hadn't fully gone over there yet. I was still a little soft on foreign policy because I was scared of terrorism. And I was aware of Ron Paul, but I had already kind of been exposed to people like Hayek and Milton Friedman, so he didn't really turn me on to the ideas. But I was impressed with what he was doing, and I admired him, but I kind of forgot about him for a few years. And then 2012 is when I really started getting more into him and more interested in what he had to say. Someone asked me the other day who is the most influential current living libertarian thinker, and I thought about it for a while, and I said, I guess I have to say Ron Paul. I can't think of anybody else except for maybe Thomas Sowell, who's doing that kind of thinking right now that is influenced so many people, because so many people were brought into the fold by the Ron Paul revolution, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, so I'm slowly working on my graduate degree at George Mason in economics, and every once in a while, one of the, I've heard Pete Becky, who's the head of that program and a friend of the show I know, will ask some of the new students why they are in what is an Austrian themed kind of school and style of economics that George Mason teaches, and he usually always asks us how many folks are here because of Ron Paul. He hasn't done that in the last couple years because we're kind of, I guess, on the tail end of when Ron Paul was at his height and influence and in the public spotlight more, but it was always a majority. But then they always do stress that Austrian economics is not a political ideology. It's a lens from the world, but it's surprising how his influence has pushed kids even into kind of pursuing the Hayeks and the Mises and those ideas.
Yeah, that's true about the economics. It's a methodology more than anything else. It stresses individualism and individual action and intentional action, things that you do for a reason, and not just these. A lot of economics platforms kind of stress people as automatic variables that just behave in the same way that molecules behave, and Austrianism really has a much more action-focused way of thinking about people with a free will emphasis and things like that. So, yeah, it's not a political ideology, but it correlates heavily with the libertarian ideology.
Yeah, people incorrectly assume it's an ideology, and it's nothing of an ideology. It's just the lens of which you analyze and view the world through.
Yeah. It reminds me of the debate between thick and thin libertarianism, where thin libertarianism is very narrow and just says you shouldn't use violence against people, basically. And then there's this thick libertarianism that advocates for all these types of, social justice platforms and says, well, you have to be for this if you're a libertarian, you have to be against this if you're a libertarian, trying to make it a more coherent, complete worldview, holistic worldview is the word I'm looking for. But, the way I think about it is a very narrow, the way that political force is legitimately used, and that's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't have anything to tell you about morality, doesn't have anything to tell you about how you should live your life. It just has something to tell you about how politics should wield force against individuals.
I think that's a great take. And then Ron Paul, kind of bringing it back to him.
Yeah.
His influence on the past 12 years has been, I think to you, I would agree. Out of all living libertarian thinkers outside of, I think it has to be him, and maybe second would be Thomas Sowell, but Thomas Sowell is almost more of an intellectual circle, where Ron Paul espouses kind of that populist libertarianism, I guess, for the lack of a better term.
I remember in 2008 when he was running, I was in New York, and I went to one of the first Tea Party rallies in New York. And, everybody thinks that the Tea Party was a response to Barack Obama, but I was there and it wasn't. It was in 2008 before Obama was elected, and it was a response to the bank bailouts under Bush. And it was very much an economic-based thing. It was similar to Occupy Wall Street. People were upset that their money was being taken and given to bail out these banks that had behaved irresponsibly and didn't deserve it. And that's the birth of the Tea Party and the birth of the Ron Paul Revolution kind of at the same time there. And it was an interesting time to be alive. Things were really changing fast.
Yeah, I remember in college during that kind of 08 phase, maybe it was 09, walking through a grocery store and finding one of those $5 boxes of books. Sometimes you see DVDs. And before I ever fell in with you guys, I picked up the book that Matt Kibbe had authored, Give Us Liberty, the Give Us Liberty book, the first one he ever authored, and buying it for $5 and reading it, not knowing that 10 years later I'd be hanging out with him and his team. So that was my first interaction with Matt.
Yeah, there's so many thinkers that I admire that I never got the chance to meet because they died before I knew about them or never got the chance to meet them. So I was really happy that I got to meet Ron Paul before it was all over. A lot of my friends met him earlier, but I kind of arrived in D.C. right as he was leaving D.C. So it never happened. But I'm happy to have been able to shake his hand, get a picture with him. He's a great man. And he gave us Rand Paul, too. So that's pretty cool.
That's true. Rand should thank his dad.
He definitely should.
I love Rand, but his dad definitely helped pave the way.
Yeah.
Do you have any Ron Paul moments? Do you think they're were the biggest kind of memories in your mind, whether that on a national stage Ron Paul did?
I really don't have any Ron Paul moments because, as I said, I was sort of already steeped in the ideology before I really knew about him. So he was sort of a parallel track to me. He didn't influence me that much directly, but I always admired him. And I definitely have a Rand Paul moment, which is when I first started working in D.C. in politics. Rand Paul did his famous 13-hour filibuster on his floor. And that was amazing. That was just an exciting day. I'd never seen anything like that before. And it was so great to see a senator finally stand up for something that was really, really important, to try to stop the president from using unilateral executive power to murder people without any kind of due process. That was really good. And I want to see more of that kind of Rand in the future.
I'd love that too. I remember the 13-hour filibuster as well. I actually had just been rewatching The West Wing, and they have
such a great show.
Yeah, it's left-wing porn because they do a great job of writing left-wing thought into a very reasonable way.
Right.
That's probably how the left views things, but it's an amazing show. The characters are unbelievable. But they have a filibuster one where an elder senator is speaking, and they eventually send another senator to relieve him. And I do remember when, I think it was Cruz or maybe it was Mike Lee, relieved Rand Paul for a very lengthy question during that.
Yeah, I think both Cruz and Mike Lee relieved him for several hours. So that was a great, you had all those senators cooperating to do the same thing. You don't see that anymore. It was really cool.
One of my favorite Ron Paul moments, might be two. The one where he pretty much ended Rudy Giuliani's political aspirations by calling him out for his the foreign policy perspective was definitely sticks in my mind as a moment where I took notice of who Ron Paul was. And the other one, which if anyone hasn't watched, his farewell speech from Congress is one of the best speeches to watch. I think.
Yeah, it's a great speech. And not only the foreign policy stuff, but I feel like nobody knew what the Federal Reserve was or cared about it until Ron Paul. He's the first one who really kind of brought it to national attention, and now everybody talks about it. But at the time, who knew what the Federal Reserve did? It was very mysterious, and so you got to thank him for bringing that to light.
What's amazing is Ron Paul made it somehow cool for college kids to say "end the Fed" on their college campuses, and I personally I am all about it, but it's not an issue I imagine as something you can sell to the broader public. Most people still don't know what the Federal Reserve is. completely or understand it. It's not nothing you get fired up without, like Second Amendment or abortion. But somehow Ron Paul made it cool on college campuses, and I think that's unbelievable.
It's a great lesson in marketing because, people think to appeal to the youth, you got to like use their hip lingo and their memes, and you got to think like they think. And, the two biggest youth movements we've seen in recent years are Ron Paul, who was a 75-year-old guy at the time, and, Bernie Sanders, same. And it's not that they were hip. They were the exact opposite of hip. They were terrible at that, but they were authentic and they were passionate, and they, spoke about things people cared about. And things they didn't even know they cared about, but they taught them to care about those things. And I think that's a lesson a lot of people could learn about trying to market to young people is you don't have to try to like inauthentically mimic their slang and their culture. You just, speak to them like adults and speak with passion and speak with authenticity, and you'll reach people.
I think you've in our past conversations between you and I, you've been pretty passionate about how a lot of politicians you think don't stand firm like a Ron Paul or even give Bernie Sanders credit, and then that's when they lose, or that's when they come in one thing, they change. I think you've seen it at FreedomWorks enough, but I think you've definitely expressed a lot of frustration and how people just
there's this truism in Washington where people think they have to be like middle of the road and they have to be careful about what they do if they don't want to stand out too much so that they get reelected. But I think that history teaches us that the people who are really successful and the ones who are really remembered don't go middle of the road. They stick to their principles, they stick to their guns, and they do big, bold things that people remember. And, Ron Paul's a great example of that, and Rand Paul's a great example of that. The ones who, just want to get reelected over and over again, the Mitch McConnells of the world, people like that, they don't do anything impressive. No one remembers them. After Mitch McConnell's done being in Congress, no one's going to remember him or what he did. It's going to be ridiculous.
I barely remember he's there now. So unless like Fox News throws him up or he does something cool where he blocks some appointment or pushes something through, I'm like, oh, that's pretty.
I am much less informed about the members of Congress now than I was like 5 years ago. It's just too depressing to pay attention to. So we got that Ron Paul interview coming out, and that should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to people seeing that. What else you got going on this week?
This week, so I've actually been working on a piece to put out and just been a little slow with it. But something that's really caught my eye, and I talked to you about it, is how China seems to be the forefront. It seems to be either it's the new boogeyman that the military industrial complex is using to have an excuse to continue militarization, or they are a legitimate threat. And then my question I keep pondering is, how does a free society deal with... China's evil.
Yeah.
One way to have it. They target their Muslims and their Christianity populations. They're crushing Hong Kong. It's an evil regime. But every solution I see that's being proposed on how America deals with them is somehow we have to curb our own freedom. And I keep saying, is that the only way?
Okay, that's an enormous topic and with a lot of things to talk about. I don't think we have time to get to it today, but write that piece, we'll publish it, and we'll talk about it next time. Because I have some thoughts on that too, and I think we could get into it and have a really interesting discussion.
Perfect. Yeah, let's wait for that to come out. Other than that, I'm going to the beach next week.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, Mike. We'll do it next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Last call.